18 days after the crash, the sound of approaching spacecraft engines filled the alien sky. The rescue ship had finally arrived, but what they found was nothing like what they expected. Captain Kolveth of the Galactic Council rescue vessel stared down at the crash site through his view screen. Instead of desperate survivors huddled around failing equipment, he saw something that looked almost like a small settlement. Gardens had been planted around the crashed ship. Organized food storage areas were visible. The crew members moving around the site looked healthy and well-fed. "Are you certain this is the right location?" Kolveth asked his navigator. "Positive, sir. This is where the emergency beacon is transmitting from. But our calculations showed they would run out of food after 5 days. It's been 18 days. They should all be dead." The rescue team landed near the crash site, expecting to find bodies or possibly a few barely alive survivors. Instead, they were greeted by Captain Zordan, who looked healthier than he had at the start of their original mission. "Captain Kolveth," Zordan said warmly, "welcome to our temporary settlement." "Settlement?" The rescue captain was confused. "We expected to find you in severe distress. Our emergency protocols called for immediate medical evacuation." "We appreciate your concern, but as you can see, we've managed quite well." Kolveth looked around the crash site in amazement. Neat rows of cultivated plants grew in cleared areas. Drying racks held preserved fruits and vegetables. The crew members were not just alive, they were thriving. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Your food supplies should have been exhausted weeks ago. This planet's ecosystem is completely uncharted. Consumption of local biological matter should have been fatal." Captain Zordan smiled and gestured toward Deho, who was teaching Yilvana how to identify ripe fruit on a nearby tree. "Our human colleague taught us some very valuable lessons about survival." "The human?" "But humans are classified as having limited adaptability and moderate technological capability. Those classifications may need to be revised." Over the next hour, Captain Zordan explained what had happened, how their food supplies had run out, how Deho had been secretly foraging and thriving on local plants, how he had eventually taught the entire crew to survive off the land. "This goes against every safety protocol in the Galactic Council manual," Kolveth protested. "Consumption of unanalyzed biological matter from unknown worlds is strictly forbidden." "The alternative was death," Zordan replied simply. "Deho's knowledge saved all our lives." The rescue captain was having trouble processing this information. "But the human species is primitive. They lack the technological sophistication for safe xenobiological analysis." "Perhaps," Veltar interjected, joining the conversation. "But they possess something we lack, the ability to survive without that technology." The Althurian scientist looked completely different from the frightened, starving researcher he had been weeks earlier. His shell was bright and healthy, his movements confident and strong. "I've learned more about practical biology in the past. 2 weeks than in years of laboratory study," Veltar continued. "The human didn't need sophisticated equipment to determine which plants were safe. He used observation, gradual testing, and evolutionary wisdom." "Evolutionary wisdom?" Captain Kolveth sounded skeptical. "His species developed survival skills over millions of years," Yilvana explained, approaching the group with her arms full of freshly gathered vegetables. "They learned to eat diverse foods, to adapt to different environments, to thrive without technological support. We called these skills primitive," Nomkesh added. "The security chief was carrying a harvest of nuts and fruits. But primitive doesn't mean inferior. Sometimes it means essential." Captain Colveth walked through their settlement, examining the food gardens and storage systems. Everything was organized and sustainable. The crew had not just survived, they had created a functioning agricultural system. The human did all this? He taught us, Captain Zordan corrected. We all contributed, but yes, his knowledge made it possible. That evening, the rescue crew joined the crash survivors for dinner. The meal consisted entirely of foods grown or gathered on the alien planet, prepared using techniques Deho had taught them. "This is actually quite delicious," Captain Colveth admitted, tasting a soup made from local roots and greens. "And you're certain it's safe?" "We've been eating it for 2 weeks," Deho replied modestly. "No one has gotten sick. In fact, everyone's health has improved." "But how did you know which plants to trust?" Deho tried to explain the process: the careful observation, the gradual testing, the accumulated knowledge passed down through human generations. To the rescue captain, it sounded impossibly reckless. To the crash survivors, it had been their salvation. Later that night, Captain Colveth filed his official report with the Galactic Council. It was unlike any rescue report in their records. "Mission crew survived 18 days beyond projected capability," he wrote. "0 casualties. Crew health excellent. Survival achieved through successful adaptation to local ecosystem using indigenous biological resources." He paused, then added, "Human crew member Kang Deho demonstrated exceptional survival capabilities not reflected in current species classifications. Recommend full review of human adaptability assessments." The report caused quite a stir at Galactic Council headquarters. How had a primitive species member succeeded where their most advanced survival protocols had failed? Word spread quickly through the galactic community. The human who could eat alien poison and turn a crash site into a garden became something of a legend. Xenobiologists wanted to study his methods. Military commanders wanted to learn his survival techniques. But for Deho, the most important change was in how his alien colleagues viewed him, and humanity in general. "We learned something important," Yilvana told him as they prepared to leave the planet. "Advanced technology is wonderful, but it's not the only form of intelligence. Your species developed a different kind of sophistication, biological sophistication. The Galactic Council needs to update more than just our species classifications," Veltar added. "We need to rethink our entire approach to survival training. What we called primitive survival skills should be part of every crew's education." Captain Zordan nodded in agreement. "I'm submitting a recommendation that all future exploration missions include at least 1 crew member trained in natural survival techniques." As they boarded the rescue ship for the journey home, Deho looked back at the alien world that had nearly killed them all. The gardens they had planted were still growing. The food systems they had developed would continue providing nutrition for any future visitors. "It's a good planet," he said quietly. "Thanks to you, we learned how to see that," Captain Zordan replied. The journey back to civilized space took several days. During that time, Deho found himself in the unusual position of being the most sought-after person on the ship. Crew members from multiple species wanted to learn his foraging techniques. Scientists wanted to understand his testing methods. Even Captain Colveth admitted that human survival skills might be valuable additions to standard Galactic Council training. When they finally reached their destination, Deho was surprised to find that news of their survival had preceded them. He was met by representatives from the Xenobiological Institute, the Galactic Exploration Command, and several universities. "We'd like you to develop a curriculum," one of the officials explained. "Survival techniques for mixed-species crews." Your methods could save lives on future missions. Daiho accepted the assignment, though he insisted on one condition. His alien colleagues from the crash would help develop the program. They had learned the skills too, and their perspectives would be valuable. In the months that followed, Daiho's survival method became standard training for exploration crews throughout the galaxy. The techniques were no longer considered primitive. They were recognized as sophisticated biological adaptations that complemented technological capabilities. The Galactic Council quietly updated their species classification files. Humans were reclassified from limited adaptability to extreme environmental adaptability. Their survival capabilities were upgraded from basic to superior. But perhaps the most important change was in understanding. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had learned that technology and biology could work together, that primitive and sophisticated were not opposites, but different approaches to the same goal: survival. Daiho returned to Earth briefly to visit his family and share his experiences. But his real home now was among the stars, teaching mixed crews of aliens and humans how to survive together in the vast, unpredictable universe. After all, as he had learned during those 18 days on an alien world, sometimes the most advanced skill of all is the simple ability to adapt and thrive, no matter where life takes you. The next morning brought something none of them had experienced since the crash: hope. For the first time in days, the crew woke up without the gnawing pain of hunger. The plant broths had worked, and everyone was still alive. Captain Zordan called the group together for a new kind of meeting. "Today, we begin survival training," he announced. "Daiho will teach us how to find and prepare food from this environment." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The crew's least technologically advanced member was now their most important survival expert. The aliens who had considered human methods primitive were now depending on those same methods to stay alive. Daiho organized the crew into small groups for safety and began their first foraging lesson. "The most important skill is observation," he explained as they walked into the forest. "Look for plants that appear healthy, growing in areas with good soil and water." Ylvana was his most eager student. Her scientific training helped her notice details that others missed. "How do you know this plant is safe?" she asked, pointing to a berry bush. "Several clues," Daiho replied. "The berries are being eaten by local animals, which suggests they're not toxic. The plant is growing abundantly, which means it's well adapted to this environment, and the berries look similar to ones I know from Earth." "But what if Earth plants and alien plants just happen to look similar?" "That's possible," Daiho admitted. "That's why we test carefully. Small amounts first, watch for reactions, build up gradually." Veltar, who had been the most opposed to eating alien plants, was now fascinated by the process. "This is actually a form of scientific method," he realized. "Hypothesis, testing, observation, conclusion." "Exactly," Daiho agreed. "Your ancestors probably used similar methods before they developed laboratory testing." The Althurian scientist looked uncomfortable. "We don't like to think about those times. We consider that era uncivilized." "Maybe uncivilized isn't the same as unintelligent," Daiho suggested gently. As the day progressed, Daiho taught them to identify different types of edible plants, root vegetables that grew underground, leafy greens that could be eaten raw or cooked, fruits that provided quick energy, nuts and seeds that offered protein and fats. This ecosystem is incredibly abundant, Yilvana observed. There's food everywhere. We look. Most healthy ecosystems are, Deho replied. Life supports life. Where you see diverse plant growth, you usually find plenty of food sources. Noam Kesh, the security chief, had initially been skeptical of the whole process. But as his strength returned from proper nutrition, he began to see the practical value. This knowledge could be valuable for future missions, he admitted. Emergency. Survival skills. The Galactic Council should probably include this kind of training, agreed one of the Grethian crew members. By afternoon, Deho was teaching them food preparation techniques, how to make nutritious broths that were easy for their sensitive digestive systems, how to identify which parts of plants were most edible, how to store food safely without refrigeration. Your species developed some very sophisticated survival methods, Veltar observed as he watched Deho prepare a complex mixed salad from various alien plants. We had to, Deho replied. Humans spread across many different environments on Earth. Each one required different survival strategies. We learned to adapt or we died. And now that knowledge is saving us. That evening, the crew enjoyed their first real meal since the crash. Deho had prepared a variety of foods, cooked roots similar to potatoes, fresh salads with edible flowers, fruit desserts, and protein-rich nut spreads. It wasn't fancy by alien standards, but it was nutritious and abundant. I feel better than I have in days, Captain Zordan admitted. His scales were returning to their normal coloration, and his movements were stronger and more confident. The change in everyone was remarkable. Shells that had been dim were brightening. Scales that had been dull were regaining their natural colors. Energy levels were returning to normal. But the most significant change was in how they viewed their human colleague. Deho was no longer the mission's backup specialist or primitive crew member. He had become their teacher and their lifeline. I have been thinking about our classification systems, Yilvana said during dinner. In our databases, we rank species by technological advancement. Humans are listed as moderate capability because your technology is less sophisticated than ours. That seems accurate, Deho replied. But now I think our classification system is incomplete. We measure technological capability, but not biological adaptability. We measure laboratory knowledge, but not survival intelligence. Veltar nodded in agreement. Our species became very good at controlling our environment, but we forgot how to adapt when we can't control it. Your species retained skills that ours abandoned, added Noam Kesh. Skills that turned out to be essential when our technology failed. As night fell, the crew settled around their camp with full stomachs and renewed hope. But there was also a new understanding between them. The technological gap between species suddenly seemed less important than the wisdom gap. Tomorrow, I want to learn how to cultivate some of these plants, Captain Zordan announced. If we're going to be here for a while, we should establish sustainable food production. Deho smiled. I can teach you that too. Humans have been farming for thousands of years. More primitive knowledge? Yilvana asked, with what might have been humor. The most practical kind, Deho replied. That night, as Deho listened to the peaceful sounds of the alien forest, he reflected on how much had changed. A week ago, he had been the least important member of an advanced alien crew. Now he was their survival expert and teacher. But more than that, he had helped his friends discover something their species had forgotten, the confidence that comes from being able to take care of themselves, no matter what technology was available around him. His alien crewmates slept peacefully, their stomachs full of food they had gathered with their own hands from the living world around them. Tomorrow, they would learn more about surviving in harmony with nature instead of in spite of it. It was, Deho thought, a good lesson for any species to remember. The decision to test alien plants was easier said than done. Back at camp, the crew faced a terrifying reality. They were about to risk their lives on food that could kill them, guided by a human whose biology was completely different from theirs. Captain. Zordan volunteered to be the first test subject. "A commander faces risks before his crew," he declared, though Deho could see the fear in his dark reptilian eyes. "We need to start very carefully," Deho explained. "Small amounts, simple preparations, close monitoring." He had been thinking about this problem during their walk back to camp. The aliens' digestive systems were evolved for processed food, sterile, predictable, easy to break down. Raw plant matter might be too harsh for their delicate stomachs. "I'm going to prepare the plants differently for you," Deho told them. "Cooking, boiling, making them easier to digest." Using their camp equipment, he started making a simple broth from the most familiar-looking plants. He chose the dandelion-like leaves, the onion-type bulbs, and some of the milder fruits. By boiling them together, he hoped to break down any, potentially problematic compounds while preserving the nutrients. The aliens watched nervously as he worked. Even weakened by hunger, they were still afraid of what they saw as primitive food preparation. "On my world, we have extensive food. Safety laboratories," Veltar said anxiously. "Chemical analysis, toxicity testing, controlled studies. This is guesswork." "It's experience," Deho corrected gently. "Humans have been doing this kind of testing for thousands of generations. We learn to survive by careful observation and gradual experimentation." The broth was ready after an hour of slow cooking. It smelled pleasant like vegetable soup. Captain Zordan stared at the bowl as if it contained poison. "Just a small sip," Deho advised. "If you feel any strange symptoms, nausea, dizziness, stomach pain, stop immediately." The captain lifted the bowl with shaking hands. All the crew members watched as he took his first taste of wild alien food. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Zordan nodded slowly. "It's not unpleasant," he admitted. "Bland but edible." They waited. 1 hour, 2 hours. Captain Zordan showed no signs of illness. In fact, he seemed slightly more alert than he had been earlier. "How do you feel?" Ylvana asked. "Better," the captain said with surprise. "Not much, but stronger." The crew's attitude began to shift. If their captain could survive alien plant broth, maybe they could too. Ylvana volunteered to try next. Her Althurian biology was different from the Grethians, so her reaction might be completely different. Deho prepared a smaller portion of the same broth and watched carefully as she drank it. Again, they waited. Again, no negative reactions. If anything, Ylvana's shell began to show slightly brighter colors, a sign of improved health in her species. "This is remarkable," she said after several hours. "I can actually feel energy returning to my body." One by one, the other crew members tried small amounts of Deho's prepared plant broths. Not everyone reacted the same way. Some species handled certain plants better than others, but none of them showed signs of poisoning. As the day progressed, Deho found himself teaching his alien colleagues skills that his own species took for granted. How to identify safe plants. How to prepare them for easier digestion. How to test new foods gradually and safely. Your species retained knowledge that mine discarded long ago, Veltar admitted. The Althurian scientist was studying the plant preparation process with intense interest. We called it primitive, but perhaps it was wisdom. Both approaches have value, Deho replied diplomatically. Your processed foods are safer and more efficient, but our natural foods are more available and diverse. By evening, the entire crew had consumed some form of prepared plant matter. For the first time since the crash, they weren't going to sleep hungry. I don't understand, Nomkesh said, sounding confused. Our scanners still show these plants as potentially toxic. Why aren't we sick? Maybe your scanners are designed for a different purpose, Deho suggested. They identify unknown compounds, not dangerous ones. In a controlled laboratory, those unknowns would be studied before consumption. But in survival situations, sometimes you have to take calculated risks. The security chief nodded slowly. His cracked shell was already looking better after just one day of actual nutrition. That night, as the crew settled down to sleep, the mood in camp was completely different. Instead of desperate hunger and approaching death, there was cautious hope. Tomorrow, you'll need to teach us more, Captain Zordan told Deho. How to find these food sources ourselves, how to prepare them safely, how to survive on this world until rescue arrives. I'd be happy to, Deho replied. Ylvana approached him as the others settled in for sleep. I have a question that's been bothering me, she said quietly. What's that? In our databases, we classify human civilization as moderately advanced. We assumed your species was less developed than ours because you still use primitive survival methods. And now? Now I'm wondering if we got it backwards. Maybe we're the less advanced ones. We can't survive without our technology, but you can thrive anywhere there's life. Deho thought about that. I think we're just differently advanced. Your species mastered controlled environments and efficient resource use. My species mastered adaptation and flexibility. Both approaches have strengths. But only one approach let us survive this situation. It was true, though, Deho didn't want to make his alien friends feel worse about their dependence on technology. Your species will adapt too, he assured her. You're already learning. As he lay down to sleep, Deho reflected on the day's events. His secret was out, his crewmates were finally eating, and no one had died from plant poisoning. It was a good day, but tomorrow would bring new challenges. He needed to teach an entire crew of technologically advanced aliens how to live like their ancient ancestors. It wouldn't be easy, but it was their best chance of survival until rescue arrived. Around him, the alien forest hummed with night sounds. For the first time since they'd crashed, those sounds didn't represent danger and the unknown. They represented home, at least temporarily. The fifth day began with the sound everyone had been dreading. Kolmesh had died during the night. The old Althurian engineer simply ran out of energy, his body shutting down from lack of nutrition. Captain Zordan stared at his fallen crew member, his scales darker than Deho had ever seen them. We have perhaps 2 days before we lose another crew member, the captain said quietly. Maybe less. The remaining crew gathered around their last emergency rations. The portions were so small, they barely qualified as food. Everyone moved slowly, carefully, trying to conserve what little energy they had left. Except for Deho. Despite his best efforts to appear weak and hungry, he couldn't hide his relatively good health. While the others grew thinner and weaker, he remained strong and alert. This is our final meal from ship's stores, Captain Zordan announced. After this, we have nothing. The words created a heavy silence. Death was no longer approaching, it was standing right next to them. That's when Ylvana spoke up. "Captain, there's something you need to know about Deho." All eyes turned to the young Althurian scientist, then to Deho. His heart started pounding as he realized his secret was about to be revealed. "What about him?" Captain Zordan asked. "He's been eating the local plants," Ylvana said simply. "For days, and he's not getting sick, he's getting stronger." The reaction was explosive. Veltar's antennae shot up in alarm. Nomkesh made an angry hissing sound. Several of the other crew members started talking at once, their voices filled with shock and anger. "Is this true?" Captain Zordan demanded, his reptilian eyes fixed on Deho. Deho took a deep breath. There was no point in lying anymore. "Yes, sir, it's true. You violated direct orders. You contaminated yourself with alien toxins. You put the entire mission at risk." Veltar was furious, his crystalline shell flashing with agitated colors. "How could you be so reckless?" Nomkesh added. "What if you had died from poisoning? What if you had spread toxins to the rest of us?" But Captain Zordan held up a clawed hand for silence. His tactical mind was working through the implications. "You've been eating local plants for several days?" "Yes, sir." "And you show no signs of illness or toxicity?" "None, sir. In fact, I feel better than I have since we crashed." The captain studied Deho carefully. It was impossible to deny that. The human looked healthy, while everyone else was clearly dying. "How many different plant species have you consumed?" "Maybe 30 different types. Fruits, leaves, roots, nuts, seeds. A wide variety." Veltar clicked his mandibles angrily. "This is impossible. Our scanners detected dangerous compounds in every plant sample." "Your scanners detected unknown compounds," Deho corrected gently. "That's not the same as dangerous. Unknown means potentially lethal. To your species, maybe. But humans evolved differently. We've been eating unknown plants for millions of years. Our digestive systems and immune systems are designed to handle variety." Ylvana moved closer to the group. "He's found abundant food sources all around our camp. While we've been starving, he's been thriving on what grows naturally here." "But how is this possible?" asked one of the Grethian crew members. "How can the same plants be safe for humans but dangerous for us?" Deho tried to explain. "Your species have lived in controlled environments for thousands of years. You eat processed food, completely safe and predictable. My species never had that luxury. On Earth, we had to eat whatever we could find. Plants, animals, fungi. We learned to survive on everything." "That's primitive," Veltar protested. "Maybe," Deho agreed. "But primitive doesn't mean wrong. It means adapted for survival." Captain Zordan was quiet for a long moment thinking. Finally, he asked, "Can you show us these food sources?" "Of course, sir." "And you believe some of them might be safe for our species as well?" "I don't know," Deho answered honestly. "Your biology is very different from mine, but some plants might be compatible with your systems, especially if prepared properly." The aliens looked at each other uncertainly. Their entire world view was being challenged. The idea that their primitive human colleague had found a solution to their desperate situation was hard to accept. "This goes against every safety protocol." "We have," Nomkesh pointed out. "So does dying from starvation," Ylvana replied. Captain Zordan made a command decision. "Show us what you found. If we're going to die anyway, we might as well examine all our options." Deho led the group into the forest. Despite their weakness, the aliens followed him to the areas where he had been foraging. He showed them the dandelion-like plants, the berry bushes, the fruit trees, the nut groves. "This is incredible," Ylvana whispered. She was looking at the abundance with new eyes. "It's everywhere. Food is literally growing all around us." Veltar ran his scanners over several plant species. The readings are the same: unknown compounds, potential toxicity warnings. But what if your definition of unknown is the problem? Deho suggested. These compounds aren't toxic. They're just different from what your species normally eats. How can you be sure? Because I'm not dead. Because I've been eating them for days and getting stronger, not weaker. Captain Zordan picked up one of the apple-like fruits and studied it carefully. If we attempt to consume these plants, what are the risks? For humans, minimal, Deho replied. For your species, I honestly don't know. Some plants might be perfectly safe. Others might be incompatible with your biology. We'd have to test carefully in small amounts. And if we guess wrong, then you might get sick. But if we do nothing, you'll definitely die from starvation. The captain turned to his crew. What does everyone think? The discussion that followed was intense. Some crew members were terrified of eating poison plants. Others pointed out that they were already dying and had nothing to lose. Finally, Captain Zordan made his decision. We'll try it. Carefully, systematically, in controlled amounts. Deho will guide us, and we'll start with the plants that appear most similar to foods from our home worlds. Veltar protested one more time. This violates every safety regulation in the Galactic Council handbook. The Galactic Council isn't here, the captain replied grimly. We are, and we're dying. Sometimes survival requires breaking the rules. They walked back to camp. Deho felt a mixture of relief and terror. His secret was out, and his friends were finally willing to try eating the abundant food around them. But what if he was wrong? What if the plants that were safe for humans proved deadly for alien species? Soon they would find out. The fourth day started with tragedy. One of the older Althurian crew members, an engineer named Cole Mesh, collapsed during the morning equipment check. His crystalline shell had turned completely gray, and he could barely move. Severe malnutrition, Veltar diagnosed after examining him. His energy reserves are nearly depleted. Without food, he has maybe 18 hours left. The announcement sent shockwaves through the group. Death was no longer a distant possibility. It was happening right in front of them. Captain Zordan's scales had turned almost black with stress. We need to make some hard decisions, the captain said grimly. Should we give Cole Mesh extra rations, or save them for those who have better chances of surviving until rescue? It was a horrible choice, and Deho could see the pain in everyone's faces. These aliens had lived comfortable, civilized lives where such decisions were never necessary. Now survival was forcing them to think like their ancient ancestors. While the others debated ratios and survival probabilities, Deho quietly left camp for another botanical survey. His conscience was eating at him. Every minute his friends grew weaker while he grew stronger from his secret foraging. In the forest, he continued his careful testing of the local ecosystem. Today he found something new. A grove of trees that produced large, protein-rich seeds similar to almonds. He also discovered a patch of root vegetables that tasted like sweet potatoes. The alien planet's ecosystem was incredibly generous. Everywhere he looked, there was food. Fruits hanging from branches, edible flowers blooming in clearings, nutritious leaves growing in the shade of larger plants. It was like a natural supermarket. As he ate, Deho thought about his crewmates back at the camp. Ylvana knew his secret, but she hadn't told the others yet. How long would her silence last? And more importantly, how could he watch them die when salvation was growing all around them? He filled his pockets with fruits and nuts, planning to somehow share them without revealing where they came from. But as soon as he returned to camp, he realized how impossible that would be. "Where have you been?" Nomkesh asked suspiciously. The security chief's cracked shell was getting worse, and hunger was making him more paranoid than usual. "Cataloging plant species in Sector 7, Deho replied, using their mapping system. "Find anything interesting?" "Just more plants with unknown chemical signatures," Deho lied. "Nothing that would pass safety protocols." But Ylvana was watching. Him again. Her scientific training made her notice details others missed. She could probably see that his energy levels were higher than they should be, that his skin had better color, that his movements were stronger and more confident. During the midday meal, if their tiny food portions could be called a meal, Deho tried to eat slowly and look as hungry as everyone else. But it was hard to pretend when his stomach was already full of delicious alien fruit. "I've been thinking about our situation," Captain Zordan announced. "If rescue doesn't arrive in the next 2 days, we need to consider emergency procedures." "What kind of emergency procedures?" asked one of the Grethians. "Hibernation protocols for those species that can manage it. Reduced activity to conserve energy. Possibly deciding who gets the remaining food." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Deho looked around at his crewmates. These intelligent, civilized beings who had never imagined they would face such primitive survival choices. After lunch, Ylvana approached him privately. "We need to talk," she said quietly. They walked to the edge of the camp, out of hearing range from the others. Ylvana's blue shell was very dim now, and she moved carefully to conserve energy. "You're not hungry," she said directly. "You haven't been hungry for days." Deho sighed. There was no point in lying to her anymore. "No, I'm not hungry." "Because you've been eating the local plants." "Yes. And they're safe." "For humans, yes. I don't know about your species." Ylvana stared at him with her large, compound eyes. "Do you realize what this means? While we're starving, you found a solution to our food problem." "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." Her voice was stronger than it had been in days. "You've proven that this ecosystem can sustain life. The plants aren't all deadly poisons like our scanner suggested. But they might be deadly for your species," Deho pointed out. "Human biology is different. What's safe for me could kill you. So we test carefully. Small amounts. Controlled experiments. The way your species learn to survive." Deho shook his head. "Your captain made it clear. No experimental food consumption. It's against protocols." "Protocols?" Ylvana's antennae twitched with frustration. "Kolmesh is dying! In 2 days, half of us will be dead. When do protocols become less important than survival?" She had a point, but Deho also understood the aliens' fear. Their species had forgotten how to take such risks. For thousands of years, their food had been safe, processed, completely predictable. The idea of eating something that might be dangerous went against everything they had been taught. That afternoon, Deho watched Kolmesh struggle to stay conscious. The old engineer was clearly dying, and there was nothing the others could do. except make him comfortable. Meanwhile, Daeho's pockets were full of nutritious food he had gathered during his morning survey. Fruits that could give Kolmesh energy, nuts that could provide essential proteins. But sharing them would mean confessing his secret foraging, and that would probably get him in serious trouble with Captain Zorkan. As evening approached, Daeho made another difficult decision. He returned to the forest and gathered more food than he had ever taken before. Not just snacks, but a full meal's worth of diverse plants. If his friends were going to discover his secret, he wanted to have evidence that the local ecosystem was abundant and safe. He carefully selected the most familiar-looking plants, things that resembled earth vegetation as closely as possible. The goal was to minimize risk while maximizing nutrition. When he returned to camp, Ylvana was waiting for him. "I've been thinking about our conversation," she said quietly, "and tomorrow I'm going to tell Captain Zordan about your foraging." Daeho's heart sank. "Ylvana, please don't. I know it looks bad, but—" "It doesn't look bad," she interrupted. "It looks like hope. You found a way to survive on this planet. Maybe you can teach us." "What if the plants poison your species?" "What if they don't?" she countered. "Right now we're definitely going to die from starvation. At least this gives us a chance." That night, as Daeho lay awake listening to Kolmesh's labored breathing, he knew his secret was about to be revealed. Tomorrow, he would have to face Captain Zordan and explain why he had been secretly eating alien plants while his crewmates starved. He just hoped they would understand that he had been trying to help, not betray them. The third day brought panic. Captain Zordan called an emergency meeting at sunrise, and Daeho could see the worry written across his reptilian features. The captain's scales had turned a dull brown color, a sign of serious stress among Grethians. "We need to face reality," the captain announced to the gathered crew. "Our food supplies are running out faster than expected. We have consumed more than half of our emergency rations." The aliens looked at each other with growing fear. Veltar's crystalline shell was noticeably dimmer than when they had crashed. Several of the other Althurians were moving very slowly, conserving their energy. "What about rescue?" asked one of the Grethian crew members. "The beacon is working, but we haven't received any response yet," Captain Zordan replied. "Best case scenario, help arrives in 7 more days. Worst case, 2 weeks. The math was terrifying. Even with strict rationing, they might have 2 days of food left. After that, they would slowly starve while waiting for rescue that might never come. Ylvana raised one of her thin arms. "What are our other options?" "There are no other options," Nomkesh said firmly. His security training made him focus on established protocols. "We follow emergency procedures. We wait for rescue. We do not take unnecessary risks." But Daeho could see that some of the aliens were starting to think differently. Hunger was a powerful motivator, even for species that had forgotten what it meant to search for food. "Sir," Daeho said carefully, "I would like permission to conduct some tests on the local plant life." "What kind of tests?" Captain Zordan asked. "Basic edibility assessments. Humans have different metabolic processes than your species. We might be able to safely test plants that would be dangerous for you." The reaction was immediate and negative. Veltar clicked his mandibles angrily. "Absolutely not. You could contaminate our water supply, our medical equipment, our entire camp with alien toxins. The risk is too great," Nomkesh agreed. "If you become ill or die from poisoning, we lose our xenobotanist and gain nothing." "But if I find safe food sources," Daeho began. There are no safe food sources, Veltar interrupted. My scanners have identified over 300 different plant species in this area. Every single one contains unknown chemical compounds. Every single one could be deadly. Deho wanted to argue, but he could see their fear was too strong. These aliens had lived for thousands of years without ever having to worry about finding food in nature. The idea terrified them more than starving. What about partial testing? Ylvana suggested quietly. Small amounts? Controlled conditions? No, Captain Zordan said firmly. We cannot risk losing anyone to experimental food consumption. That's final. The meeting ended with stricter rationing. Each crew member would now receive only half of their previous food allocation. The tiny portions would barely keep them alive, but it might buy them 1 or 2 extra days. Deho spent the rest of the morning helping with repair work, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about the abundance he had seen in the forest, plants that looked safe, familiar, nutritious. While his alien crewmates grew weaker, all that food was growing just beyond their camp. That afternoon, he volunteered for another plant survey. This time, he went alone. The aliens were too weak to send anyone with him. Just stay close to camp, Nomkesh warned. Don't take any risks. Once he was out of sight of the crash site, Deho made a decision that went against his orders. He began testing the plants more seriously, not just tiny tastes, but actual consumption. He started with the dandelion-like plants. The leaves were bitter but familiar. His human digestive system handled them easily. Next, he tried the berries that looked like elderberries. They were sweet and juicy, with no bitter aftertaste that might indicate toxins. The apple-like fruits were delicious. Crisp and slightly tart, they reminded him of fruit from earth orchards. He ate 2 of them and felt better than he had since the crash. As the hours passed, Deho worked his way through different plant species. His human body, evolved over millions of years to process diverse foods, handled everything without problems. Not only was he not getting sick, he was getting stronger. The spinach-like leaves were full of nutrients. The onion-like bulbs added flavor and probably had medicinal properties. He even found nuts growing on some of the trees, rich in proteins and fats his body needed. By evening, Deho had eaten more nutritious food than he had consumed in the past 3 days combined. Meanwhile, his alien crewmates were growing visibly, weaker from their tiny rations. At dinner, the crew received their smallest portions yet. Deho ate his allocation but didn't really need it. He was already well fed from his secret foraging. How long can different species survive without food? Ylvana asked Veltar. Althurians can last perhaps 5 days with minimal nutrition, the scientist replied. Grethians maybe 7 days. After that, organ systems begin to shut down. What about humans? She asked, looking at Deho. Humans are more resilient, Veltar admitted reluctantly. Their primitive biology allows them to survive longer periods without processed nutrition. Perhaps 10 days, maybe more. Deho said nothing, but he noticed Ylvana watching him carefully. Her large eyes seemed to be studying his movements, his energy level, his general health. That night, as the camp settled into worried sleep, Deho lay awake, feeling guilty. He was surrounded by friends who were slowly starving, while his stomach was full of delicious alien food. But what could he do? They had forbidden him from testing the plants, refused to even consider natural foraging. Deho! Ylvana's voice was barely a whisper in the darkness. Yes? You seem different today, more energetic. Daeho's heart started beating faster. Had she figured out his secret? I'm just trying to stay positive. My species is very good at observing details, she continued quietly. We have to be for scientific accuracy. You're not showing the same signs of hunger as the rest of us. Daeho didn't know what to say. If Ylvana reported her suspicions to Captain Zordan, he could be in serious trouble. Are you testing the plants? She asked directly. After a long pause, Daeho answered honestly. Yes. And I'm not getting sick. I'm getting stronger. Ylvana was quiet for several minutes. Finally, she asked, how many different plants have you tried? Maybe 20 different species. Fruits, leaves, roots, nuts. All of them seem safe for human consumption. This goes against all our safety protocols. I know. If the others found out, they would be very angry. I know that too. Another long silence. Then Ylvana asked the question Daeho had been dreading. What are you going to do? Let us starve while you thrive on secret food? It was the question that had been keeping him awake. Daeho stared up at the alien stars and tried to find an answer that didn't make him feel like a traitor to his crew or a fool for risking his life. I don't know, he admitted finally. I really don't know. The second day began with bad news. During the night, more of their equipment had failed. The food storage unit was barely working, and some of their emergency rations had spoiled. They now had even less time than they thought. Daeho woke up early and watched the aliens start their day. Each species had different morning routines, but they all moved slowly and carefully. He could see they were already feeling the effects of reduced food. Their movements were more deliberate, their voices quieter. Veltar approached him with a scanning device. We need you to help catalog the local plant life, the Althurian scientist said. For safety purposes, of course, we must identify all potential hazards in our immediate area. Of course, Daeho agreed, though he had different ideas about what they should be looking for. They walked together into the forest surrounding the crash site. Daeho carried his own scanning equipment, but his eyes were doing most of the real work. Years of botanical study had taught him to notice details that machines often missed. The alien forest was incredible. Trees stretched high above them, their bark smooth and silver-colored. Vines covered in small, bright flowers wrapped around the trunks. The ground was soft with fallen leaves and small plants that looked remarkably familiar. Fascinating ecosystem, Veltar commented, checking his scanner. High biodiversity, complex chemical signatures from all plant matter. All readings indicate potential toxicity. But Daeho was seeing something different. Near a fallen log, he spotted plants that looked almost exactly like dandelions from Earth. Their leaves were the same shape, their roots probably similar. A little further on, he found bushes covered with small dark berries that reminded him of elderberries. What are your instruments detecting exactly? Daeho asked. Unknown alkaloids, unfamiliar proteins, chemical compounds not in our databases, Veltar replied. Standard protocol requires extensive laboratory analysis before any biological material can be considered safe. How long would that analysis take? Weeks, minimum, months for complete safety certification. Daeho knelt down beside the dandelion-like plants. To his trained eye, they looked perfectly normal and healthy. The leaves had the same bitter scent he remembered from Earth. His human instincts told him these plants were not only safe, but probably nutritious. "Your people have really never eaten wild plants?" he asked Veltar. The Althurian made a sound that might have been laughter. "Not for 10,000 years. Why would we? Processed nutrition is safer, more efficient, better controlled. Wild plant consumption is primitive." There was that word again. Primitive. But Dayho was beginning to wonder if what the aliens called primitive might actually be practical. They continued their survey, with Veltar carefully documenting every plant species for his hazard report. Dayho helped, but he was mentally cataloging something different. Plants that looked safe. Plants that might be edible. Plants that could keep them alive. He found what appeared to be wild onions growing near a stream. Their smell was sharp and familiar. Nearby grew something that looked like spinach. Broad green leaves in the same distinctive shape. On trees throughout the forest hung fruits that resembled apples, though they were more yellow than red. "The chemical diversity is remarkable," Veltar continued, completely focused on his scientific scanning. "Some of these compounds could be valuable for pharmaceutical research if they prove non-toxic." "What if they're not toxic?" Dayho asked. "What if they're actually safe to eat?" Veltar's antennae twitched with alarm. "That's impossible to determine without proper testing. The risk is too great. One wrong plant could kill us all." They returned to the crash site around midday. The other crew members were gathered around Captain Zordan, who was dividing up the day's rations. Each portion was smaller than the day before. Ylvana received her tiny piece of emergency food and sat down, near Dayho. She looked tired, and her blue shell was definitely getting dimmer. "How are you feeling?" Dayho asked quietly. "Hungry," she admitted. "My species requires regular nutrition. We don't store energy the way some others do." She looked at her small food portion sadly. "This isn't enough." Dayho wanted to tell her about the plants he had seen, but he knew it would only upset her. The aliens were too afraid to even consider natural food. After lunch, Nomkesh called everyone together for a security briefing. The Althurian security chief's cracked shell looked worse today, but he was still trying to maintain order. "We need to establish a perimeter around our camp," he announced. "No one goes into the forest alone. We don't know what dangers might be out there." "What kind of dangers?" asked one of the Grethian crew members. "Predators, poisonous plants, dangerous terrain," Nomkesh replied. "This is an unexplored world. We must assume everything is hostile until proven otherwise." Dayho thought about the peaceful forest he had walked through that morning. He had seen small, harmless creatures and beautiful plants. It didn't feel hostile at all. It felt abundant and welcoming. That afternoon, he volunteered to help with more plant surveys. This time, Ylvana came with him. As they walked through the forest, she asked him questions about his work. On Earth, how do humans know which plants are safe? She wanted to know. "We learn," Dayho explained. "Sometimes through trial and error, sometimes from other humans who learned before us. We start with small amounts, watch for reactions, build up knowledge over time." That sounds dangerous. It can be. But it's also how we survived for millions of years before we had technology. Ylvana was quiet for a moment. "My people's history talks about a time before processed food. But those records are very old. We consider that era uncivilized." "Maybe uncivilized isn't the same as wrong," Dayho suggested gently. She looked at him with her large, compound eyes. "You really think some of these plants might be safe?" Daeho chose his words carefully. I think this ecosystem is healthy and diverse. In my experience, that usually means there are food sources available. But what if you're wrong? What if the plants here are completely different from Earth plants? That's possible, Daeho admitted. But some things about life are universal. Plants need energy to grow. They need nutrients. Those same nutrients could probably nourish us too. As they walked back to camp, Ylvana seemed thoughtful. The other day, you said humans still remember how to forage. Do you mean you personally know how? Daeho nodded. I grew up in a rural area. My grandmother taught me to identify wild plants, which ones were edible, which ones to avoid. It's not uncommon knowledge among humans. But you won't try it here. Not without permission from your captain, Daeho said. I'm part of this crew. I follow orders. But even as he said it, Daeho knew he was already bending that rule. Throughout their walk, he had been unconsciously tasting things. A leaf here, a small berry there. Just tiny amounts, barely noticeable. His human body was already starting to test the alien ecosystem, and so far everything tasted fine. That evening, as the alien crew settled down for another night of hunger, Daeho lay awake thinking. Around him, the forest was full of life and abundance. Food grew everywhere. He was sure of it. But fear and protocol were keeping his crewmates from even considering it. He could hear some of the aliens talking quietly in their own languages. The tones sounded worried, desperate. They were already planning what to do when the food ran out completely. Daeho closed his eyes and listened to the night sounds of the alien forest. Somewhere out there was everything they needed to survive. The question was whether he could convince them to trust in something their species had forgotten long ago: the ability to live off the land. The ship shook violently as another meteoroid hit the hull. Sparks flew from the control panels, and the lights flickered on and off. Kang Daeho gripped his seat tightly as the vessel spun out of control. Emergency landing protocols activated. Captain Zordan shouted over the noise. His reptilian scales had turned dark red, showing his stress. The Grethian commander's clawed hands moved quickly over the emergency controls. Daeho watched through the small window as the unknown planet grew larger and larger. The surface looked green and blue, with thick forests and wide rivers. It reminded him of Earth, but he knew it was completely alien. This was Kepler 442c, a world no one had ever visited before. The crash was terrible. Metal screamed against rock as the ship slid across the ground for what felt like forever. When everything finally stopped, Daeho's ears were ringing. Smoke filled the air, and emergency lights blinked red in the darkness. "Sound off! Everyone report!" Captain Zordan called out. One by one, the crew members answered. 12 beings had survived the crash. Daeho was the only human. 7 Althurians, including their lead scientist Veltar and the young researcher Ylvana, were alive but shaken. The security chief Nom Kesh's crystalline shell had several cracks, but he could still move. 4 Grethians, including the captain, had made it through as well. "Medical bay is destroyed," reported one of the Grethian crew members. "Food synthesizers are completely gone. Water recycling is working, but barely." Veltar clicked his mandibles nervously. The tall, insect-like alien moved carefully through the wreckage, his crystal-like skin reflecting the emergency lights. "I need to check our emergency supplies immediately." The news was bad, very bad. They had enough emergency food bars for maybe 5 days if they were very careful with portions. The planet's air was breathable. Their sensors showed that much, but everything else was unknown. This world has never been studied, Veltar announced to the group. We know nothing about the local life forms, the plants, or any possible dangers. Our databases have no information about this ecosystem. Deho looked out through a crack in the hull. Strange trees grew everywhere, with leaves that seemed to shimmer in colors he had never seen before. Flowers bloomed in impossible shades, of purple and orange. Vines hung from branches like natural curtains. It looked beautiful, but he understood the aliens' concern. What about foraging? Deho suggested. I'm a xenobotanist. I could examine the local plants and see if any might be safe to eat. The reaction from the aliens was immediate and strong. Veltar's antennae twitched in what Deho recognized as extreme alarm. Absolutely not. Consuming unprocessed biological matter from an unknown ecosystem could result in immediate death. The safety protocols are very clear, Captain Zordan added, his voice firm. No organic consumption without complete laboratory analysis. That process takes weeks, sometimes months. Nomkesh, the Althurian security chief, stepped forward. Despite his cracked shell, he looked intimidating. The Galactic Council has these rules for good reasons. Many exploration teams have died from eating unknown plants. Deho wanted to argue, but he understood their fear. Both Althurian and Grethian species had lived in sterile, controlled environments for thousands of years. They ate only food that was processed, analyzed, and approved by their governments. The idea of eating something directly from nature terrified them. I've studied many different ecosystems, Deho said carefully. Humans have experience with identifying safe plants. Your species is known for taking dangerous risks, Veltar replied. We cannot allow such primitive methods to endanger this mission. The word primitive stung, but Deho said nothing. He had heard it before. To the advanced alien species, humans were newcomers to space travel. They saw human methods as outdated and unsafe. Our priority is survival and rescue, Captain Zordan announced. We will ration our remaining food supplies. The emergency beacon is working. Help will come. How long? Asked Ylvana. The young Althurian scientist looked worried. Her shell, which should have been bright blue, was already starting to fade, a sign of stress in her species. Minimum 10 days, the captain admitted. Possibly 15. This is a remote system. A heavy silence fell over the group. They all understood the math. 5 days of food, minimum 10 days until rescue. Even with careful rationing, at least half of them would starve before help arrived. We need to focus on repairs, Captain Zordan continued. If we can get the engines working, even partially, we might be able to reach a space station. But Deho could see the damage. The engine section was completely destroyed. Twisted metal and melted components lay everywhere. They weren't going anywhere in this ship. As the day went on, Deho helped catalog the damage and organize their remaining supplies. He watched the aliens work with their usual efficiency, but he could see the fear in their movements. Every action was measured, every breath controlled. They were used to having technology solve their problems. The alien crew divided their emergency rations into tiny portions. Each meal was barely enough to keep them alive. Deho received the same small amount as everyone else, even though he was much larger than most of the crew. That evening, as the alien sun set behind the strange trees, Deho sat alone near the damaged hull. The forest around them was full of life. He could hear birds, or things like birds, singing in the trees. Small creatures moved through the undergrowth. The air smelled fresh and clean, full of growing things. His botanical training told him that this ecosystem was healthy and diverse. Where there was this much life, there had to be food. Plants that could nourish, fruits that could sustain life. His human instincts, developed over millions of years of evolution, urged him to explore and gather. But the aliens had made their position clear. Any attempt to eat local plants would be seen as reckless endangerment. They would rather starve than risk what they called primitive food gathering. Ylvana approached him as the stars began to appear. "You look troubled, Deho." "I'm thinking about our situation," he replied honestly. 5 days isn't very long." "No, it isn't." She sat down beside him, her movements careful and precise. "On my world, we learn about the old times in school, before technology, before processed food. My ancestors once lived like your people still do." "What do you mean?" "Eating things directly from nature, gathering food from plants and trees. We called it foraging, I think. But that knowledge is lost now. We've been civilized for over 10,000 years. Deho nodded slowly. Humans still remember how we had to learn. Living on Earth. Many different plants. Some safe, some dangerous. We developed ways to tell the difference. Perhaps that knowledge will be useful here, Ylvana said quietly. Then she looked around nervously and lowered her voice. "But don't let the others hear me say that. They would think I was being foolish." As she walked away, Deho stared out at the alien forest. Somewhere in those trees and bushes was food. He was sure of it. The question was whether he would be allowed to find it before it was too late.